All right, guys, welcome to another podcast. Today, I am honored to have a wonderful guest, top expert in urban warfare studies. He teaches at West Point. His name is John Spencer. If you haven't heard of him, you should check him out. He's been interviewed multiple times on all the top alphabetical soup, CNN, BBC's, everybody. He's the go-to individual on the issue of Israel and urban warfare and the current war that's been going on for us here in Israel with Gaza, but also beforehand, he's also been covering the war in Ukraine. And so, actually, that really fits in well with the current war that we're fighting. And we'll talk about that a little bit here on the show. So, just to give you guys a little bit of background, that's his background. That's what he is an expert in, actually, as far as academically speaking. And that's a big deal for us here on the podcast because we're going to dive into some very hot topics, if you will. Um, Mr. Spencer, would you please do us a favor and just give us a pretty, I guess, brief background of yourself and let the audience know, who you are and how'd you get to being one of the top world experts on urban warfare?
Sure. Well, one, thanks for having me on the show. An honor. So I served 25 years in the U.S. Army as an infantry soldier. Served from private to sergeant first class, then became an officer, lieutenant to major. Two combat tours in Iraq. I jumped in as a paratrooper in the invasion in 2003. I went back in 2008 and 9 into Baghdad as a company commander during like the Battle of Sadr City. Through the transitions, I then at one point became an advisor to our top four-star general, our chief of staff for the Army, looking academically at megacities, which really started my academic look at urban warfare, although I had my own experiences, but to actually begin scholarship, I was working in the Pentagon for that four-star general. I moved to West Point, became an instructor of everything from tactics to actual military strategy, all the theories, stood up the research center, which is really big in universities all around the world. But we stood up one to look at modern wars. So it's the Modern War Institute, who I work for now. But while I was teaching, worked, started writing about urban warfare, started doing field research, retired in 2018, and started really traveling the world, going into recently ended or ongoing conflicts to study urban and underground warfare. Of course, that brought me to Israel often, um, going back to like 2017, 18, doing tunnel conferences with IDC Herzliya, studying the Battle of Suez City, Jenin, Nablus, the 67 Battle of Jerusalem, really understanding the IDF's evolution for urban combat and underground warfare. I was in Hezbollah tunnels in the north, visited after the Guardian of the Walls operation. But I had also all these other wars. I'd gone into Nagorno-Karabakh in 2021, four times into Ukraine, writing and expanding the my own knowledge, but also the body of knowledge on urban combat and underground warfare.
Wow, that's a mouthful I mean, for most of the people who are listening, they probably don't have the same backgrounds that we do. So in their minds, that's like, wow, cool, that's a lot of stuff. And for somebody who comes from the field, I can tell you that's a ridiculous amount of experience. And again, that's why you're on the podcast because this whole podcast is dedicated to people who are the man in the arena of the subject matter. And you're clearly the man in the arena. You've had your experience deployed as a soldier, and and leading soldiers into warfare. And I think that's those are two different shoes or hats to wear. I guess you say in America, right? Two different hats to wear. There's a big difference between being led into battle, being given orders, and as we call it in Israel, having the small headedness in battle versus um, you know, here's our objective. Let's put orders together. How are we going to take over this compound? How are we going to get through those tunnels? And I need you to make sure that you have a plan ready and that you debrief, the command that's going to send you out, and then later on pass on that command to your soldiers. Big difference, and a lot of a different weight of responsibility, and that's something that I've experienced firsthand with my major, who's the head of our unit. I'm in a special forces unit in this round of reserves. I haven't been my whole career. I started as a normal Givati guy
I heard. Yeah,
back in 2003. Yeah, you're smiling. Where we were the ones that kind of spearheaded a lot of the urban warfare tactics for the military as a whole during the Second Intifada and all of the combat in Gaza. And so you might have you might have run into some Givati guys during your studies and during your back and forth here into Israel. But there's a huge difference between serving in a bigger platoon. We call it platoons, basically 100 guys versus a small group of guys, and then your direct in command is a high up commander, and everything's very more like you get to see what he sees basically, if that makes sense. And it's less of the small-minded soldier. You have a bigger picture because he just shares it straight up with you, and you're with him, right? So, can you explain to us a little bit about the the differences, I guess you could say, between the conflict that we're having now in Gaza and what you encountered in Iraq during your time there? I mean, what are the similarities? What are the differences? I guess is a good way to, you know.
yeah. That's a big topic. I I agree with you on the different echelons of understanding. As a platoon leader jumping into northern Iraq, a part of the invasion of a paratroop platoon of 40, my awareness of what was going on in the broad scale of it was limited. Um, of course, I have, as an academic, and also, which is interesting, you say those things like, having served as a private up to sergeant, up to officer, and then studying at the Pentagon level, literally the 4-star levels, and now
Yeah,
having worked with political leaders.
yeah.
Few people can grasp the complexities or the level of what they need to understand, what they do understand, what's the role they've been given. Few people, even in the military, let alone especially in the civilian world, understand that complexity. From
Hmm.
my experiences in Iraq, I got to see literally both sides of the coin. I was a part of the invasion force whose goal was to overthrow the Saddam regime and the Ba'ath Party.
Hmm.
That was, I mean, and I was engaging a uniformed division of Iraqi military in the north within a week of jumping into northern Iraq. That's what we call conventional warfare, right? So fighting a
Yeah,
conventional
exactly.
with very straight,
Uniform to
yeah,
uniform. You
yep,
can identify that's the Iraqis. This is the Australians. Here are the French. Here, whatever.
yes,
Right. I mean, like you can identify. Yeah.
yeah. But all war also includes, I think, there's a scale. I mean, within weeks, we're transitioning into this other phase. I guess the Israelis have A, B, and C phases. We have, phase 3 and 4. I was there when when Saddam went away. The Iraqi military literally just lost the will to fight and took off their uniforms and molded back into society. But then I'm a platoon
Mm,
leader on the ground going, yeah, but there's lots of violence. People are beheading people. There's looting everywhere. There's like serious chaos across the entire nation. And as
yeah,
an infantry soldier,
I heard about that.
I'm trained to close with and destroy the enemy. Now you want me to turn into a policeman. So I went, and
Right.
as a platoon leader, you're like
Yeah.
dealing with it to include, like, as you understand, like escalation of force. Like, he's looting.
Yeah.
He's not trying to kill me. And
Exactly.
dealing with your soldiers. Like, what are we doing here? This is, I have written since October 7th about even, the so-called flower massacre, about the giving out the humanitarian aid. Like, that was me in 2003, who's trying
Right.
to deliver water trucks and propane trucks to mobs of people, and it was a
Yeah.
completely different context.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
understood very little. Like, matter of fact, we were told, which is you'll relate to as well. Like, when we were jumping into northern Iraq, we were told this would be a 90-day deployment and guaranteed 90-day deployment. Um,
Oh,
because
what a
that's what,
mistake to even believe that.
yeah,
Right.
a 2-star general told our forces
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
now as an academic, like why would you think that? Because of
Right. Right.
the
Right.
goal was to overthrow the regime and the government, and we had these plans for who would become the new government. Um,
Hmm.
the CNN broke to our families that we would be there for 12 months. The difference in my understanding of what we were doing, like the missions were very clear, the metrics were clear, and then they became very unclear in a matter of
Hmm.
days. When they're
Yeah.
making national level, I was on the ground when they decided that all the Iraqi army, 100,000 plus people would never receive another paycheck. They're out of jobs. And when they decided that nobody in the Ba'ath Party could ever work in the government, so there's no other person who's going to, I was there on the ground for that. I understand the complexities of, post conflict operations is what we call it. I returned in 2008 though, like 5 years later. I went off to be
Hmm.
a ranger instructor. Like got back to the to the clearing rooms, tactics, training, leading men. And I went back in 2008 when it was a completely different war. The war was basically building stability so we could leave. But this whole idea again in an urban environment, I was putting up. Well, one of the reasons I'm the urban warfare guy is because when I started that research center, I wrote one article because the world, unlike Israel, in the United States, only 1% of the serve in the military. Most people don't know anybody who's ever served or is serving. It's just because of our
Hmm.
size. I wrote an article about how when I returned as a company commander, now of 140 infantry, mechanized infantry soldiers, mostly every day I was putting up concrete walls, creating safe neighborhoods within Baghdad, and then going around and talking to gang leaders who were keeping those areas safe because we were paying them
Hmm.
to. But
Exactly.
I wrote this article
Yeah.
about the use of concrete walls and how effective that was, and the whole world was like, "What do you mean you use concrete walls to achieve stability in Iraq? Wasn't it this? They had these other ideas of what achieved a level of low violence. Like, no, we did it with concrete walls and other tactics."
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So that's interesting because a lot of what you're saying is also a lot of the stuff that I experienced in our military and in implementing those similar tactics. So it's kind of funny where you see I can see there's overlaps in tactics and strategy, and obviously we share ideas to each other. Um,
I mean, I think it's more
so
Doran. It's more than that. I mean, this is
yeah,
where I'll give the look. And I'm not Israeli. I'm not Jewish. I'm as a red, white, and blue. I bleed red, white, and blue. All of
yeah,
the statements. But
yeah,
having taught strategy, taught the evolutions of the U.S. military. Um, Most people, if they don't know, your audience doesn't know. After the Yom Kippur War, the U.S. military sent massive amounts of people to study how did Israel pull it off? How did they achieve the unachievable? And
yeah,
we started 27 studies. It fundamentally changed the U.S. military. So the
yeah,
sharing between the American, I mean, literally, we have the strength of the U.S. military because of the lessons learned by the Israeli military under attack. Even
hmm,
the close quarters battle, because I'm the urban warfare guy, tracing that
hmm,
back to the terrorism of Israel and the creation of the Yamam and the counterterrorism tactics that bled into our CT forces, which bled into our general purpose forces. And why am I teaching enter and clear a room as an infantry soldier? I had to do that in complete history. Like the relationship between the Israeli military and the U.S. military is very historic, and the cross pollination of ideals. And this is where I can talk about Gaza,
mm,
why do I keep going back to Gaza with the idea? Like you said, if I
hmm.
embed with a division commander who's talking to the brigade commanders, and I can see things that other people might, based on who they are and what history they have. But I can see that there are lessons being learned in Gaza that will impact and save American lives in the future.
So um, so basically, you guys have learned from us, we learn from you, and we swap ideas, and that has been very successful. I've noticed for us on the battlefield is those cooperations, those sharing of ideas, tactics, like your guys fought in Vietnam. We didn't fight in no Vietnam, right? So guerrilla warfare, or was it like jungle warfare, which would be similar to fighting up in the north against Hezbollah. So that's more of that kind of warfare. So I imagine we learned a few things from guys that had been through the jungle and whatnot. And so there's definitely been a sharing of ideas, which I think is very helpful, because Israel's an ally to the United States, and the United States is an ally to Israel, and so we help each other out. And I think that's the strength that a lot of people and a lot of Americans today on the streets are missing out on. They're not understanding the big picture. They think that there's this big Zionist, how'd you call, plan, right, to control U.S. politics, control Hollywood, control, the money flow, the whatever. I'm like, listen, people, you don't understand. I mean, like, especially guys who have been deployed, very well that it's those corporations that's helped each other out for years, and that is a very strong relationship that I think the soldiers know better than anybody who's on the streets. And definitely, I think anyone who's, let's say, in the political realm, so to speak, they know that probably less, because if they've been voted into office or whatever, the chances of them having that experience before they went to Washington or before they went to the Knesset, it's going to be different. Um, but any case, so what would you say that, um, like how like in Iraq, for example, you were fighting against Saddam Hussein, right? And I remember that time. I remember 2003. I remember that's when I started my service. Actually, later, but that's when I started. And I remember that I had to go to base with my gas mask, like strapped to my hip.
Hmm.
It was like that was the reality. We were in DEFCON 3 or whatever you want to call it, right? It was in any moment you could get gas attacked, and you need to have your gas mask on you. And I remember watching and looking at the news, watching the United States engaging, and seeing brave soldiers fall in battle, seeing their names. I mean, it really gripped me. Um, but the thing is, when you're fighting Saddam Hussein, you're not fighting Al Qaeda, you're not fighting Hamas, you're not fighting ISIS. Can you explain a little bit that the difference in that dynamic? Because I think there's a big difference between what you had to face and the current war, you know, after Afghanistan and so on, right? I mean, it kind of changed completely, I guess, as far as ideology. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the ideology so people understand what you're talking about here, or what we're facing, I guess, is the deal.
Yeah, which it's very relevant to right now. One is even within Israel on what people believe is the IDF's goals in Gaza.
Hmm.
You can, through my experience in Iraq alone, can walk through the transitions and the goals of a military at the moment and how there are massive differences. So you're right, in invading, trying to do a regime change, overthrow the government. And then that's step one. And then step two is in basically there's a new power. And that is what people have now become to think that all wars like that. Al Qaeda in Iraq was a terrorist group. It was an insurgency. It was both resisting the U.S. forces in the area, but more importantly, resisting the government that the United States was backing in Iraq, to include elections. And I was part of like securing elections so the people could choose their government. And with the complexities of the Shia Sunni divide, the minority, the majority, and all the different groups, those terrorist groups, AQI, Al Qaeda in Iraq, Jaish al Mahdi, the Shia militias, all these groups that we were fighting after we had achieved our initial goal. Then you have these other groups who are contesting the power in the region. We call them insurgencies. Most of the time, these insurgencies also use terrorist tactics, so they'll be classified as terrorists because they're using mass casualty events against civilians. They're using all these guerrilla tactics with the IEDs. What became the problem? One is it took the United States from 2003, really, since we overthrew within 2 weeks we had, for both Afghanistan and Iraq, within 2 weeks we achieved our goal of removing the current power in that country and removing their will to fight, which is also the other goal. The military's evaporated. They were not resisting us. They became insurgencies that resisted the government which we were backing, not us. Like we
Hmm.
weren't ruling either place. So
Yeah.
even as a young platoon leader in Iraq, as we're like, I don't know what's going on at that national level, like I'm fighting every day in the streets, but I'm getting attacked within weeks by IEDs and things of both criminal groups and terrorist groups and insurgents group, and literally everything is attacking because there's a void and a power vacuum and a security and all these things.
Yep.
The
Yep.
problem is that it took us from 2003 till 2007, 4 years of just fighting insurgency and without a plan for what would get us out of there, really, which is
Hmm.
our goal, right? This wasn't on our borders. This wasn't attacking us.
Right.
So this is even ISIS, right? So the evolution of these terrorist groups. Then you had the U.S. military pull out of Iraq, and most people don't even do this thread because they're just not informed enough. As soon as the U.S.
Yeah.
military pulls out of Iraq government institutes a bunch of sectarian policies which allow a terrorist group called ISIS, Islamic, State in Iraq and whatever, to gain power and seize terrain. So it was actually unique because it was also an insurgency, but it actually had seized terrain like major cities, like the city of Mosul. And then the U.S. military comes back after invitation of the new government, who had basically, because of them, this insurgent terrorist group had gained favor and power, and they needed our help to cut that cancer out of its nation. We're still fighting an insurgency. This is where I can't get people to stop applying that metric to Gaza. Like Hamas is
Yeah.
not an
Yeah.
insurgency.
Right.
So
Correct.
which
That's right.
the
That's a
metric,
great point. That is a great point. I think that's a great point because I don't think I've heard anybody say that, and they don't even know how to articulate
right?
it. Right.
So this is the idea
That's a,
of like
yeah.
2003 when I invaded Iraq, and when the U.S. military invaded Iraq and invaded Afghanistan. You know how much we cared about the polls of how much the society cared about us or whoever. Like, you invade a country to overthrow the power and remove the military's will to fight.
Hmm.
But everybody's applying that metric now. They're saying, like, look, you radicalized. There's more people who support Hamas and Judea and Samaria than before the war. Like, who?
Right.
That has nothing to do with this current phase of the operation, which is remove Hamas from power, dismantle its military.
Correct.
Afterwards, once Israel moves into that other phase, which we entered, there's a new
Hmm.
power. There's a vacuum in power. You have to diffuse the power. You have to create new security frameworks. But
Yeah.
it's ridiculous that that's the metric of military success. It's like, no, that's not the metric. Like, do you think that we cared what the I mean, there was 100% support for the Emperor of Japan in the Japanese population during all of World War
Right.
II. It didn't matter
Hmm.
what you did, but you think that has nothing to do with the metrics of war. War is about pursuing strategic objectives. And Israel's
Hmm.
objectives in Gaza are very clear, but because I'm the urban guy, I had to show people, and this is probably where you've heard my name, is that why in the entire 9 years that the U.S. military is in Iraq, through all these different phases of the Iraq War, from invading and quickly achieving our immediate goals till we make a decision, okay, our other goal is to stand up this new government, et cetera, et cetera. But from 2003 to 2011, the greatest battles are the 2004 Battle of Fallujah, and then that's it. It's bigger than the Battle of Baghdad to overthrow the entire Iraq government and military. Because if somebody is given time to defend urban terrain, then it's
Yeah.
going to be a massive battle. So why is
Hmm.
the second Battle
Yeah.
of Fallujah the biggest battle of the entire Iraq war? Because the insurgent was given just 6 months,
Yep.
6 months to prepare defensive lines. And then the 2016 Battle of Mosul against ISIS and most people don't know this, is the largest urban battle since World War II. Like
Mm.
that's pretty
Wow.
crazy. There's a lot of
That
war.
is, yeah.
You know why? Because
No.
the Iraqi government allowed ISIS to hold the city of Mosul for 2 years, and for 2 years, ISIS prepared that city to fight for it. It had a
Wait.
yeah,
So you just said the Iraqi government,
yes,
the one that the United States supported,
yes,
is it's the same one,
yes,
right? The same, how would you call them? Your, your appointees that you felt
yes,
were the ones that
yep,
could stabilize Iraq after
correct,
Saddam.
yep.
Those guys were the ones that let ISIS in.
They actually created I
Why?
so because we built their military and their security apparatuses into what we thought would be necessary for its national security purposes. We didn't
Hmm.
build, we took, so one of the reasons why we were be able to be successful was not only did we deploy 175,000 troops into Iraq, but we built the Iraqi army, the Iraqi police, the Iraqi local security forces that those gang members I was paying. Uh,
Yeah.
but we built all that with a certain construct to include the army was built to fight for national security. It wasn't built to fight internal battles against ISIS. So ISIS was that government, yes, actually, because it immediately implemented a bunch of sectarian policies. Like as soon as we left, like a month later, they're throwing the vice president in jail because he's not Shia. Like it's crazy. And
Hmm.
that created
Okay.
ISIS, and then ISIS seized cities. And one of the things it seized in Mosul was like a division's worth of army equipment. So this,
Right.
which
I
really
remember that.
gets back to metrics, right? Like Hamas's military is a military with infrastructure and rockets and tunnels and
Yeah.
there'll be a bunch of bad people all around the world, but if they don't have terrain and military capability, then there's just a lot of bad people plotting against you.
Right.
But yeah, so ISIS took Mosul in 2014, as in
Hmm.
over like literally drove in pickup trucks. Really an impressive attack. What they did in Mosul, used social media, everything.
I remember that. Yeah.
Took over the Iraqi army's equipment and the police, and then basically ruled that city for 2 years,
Mm.
and built three major defensive lines in case anybody ever came for that city. It was the caliphate. It was the capital of their caliphate. The Iraqi
Yeah.
government, because they had their own issues, their ISIS was threatening Fallujah again. They were flushing Tal Afar. ISIS was spreading. But for
Hmm.
2 years, the Iraqi government let ISIS hold that city. So they paid in huge cost to retake that city. So this is why is it the biggest
Hmm.
battle since World War II? Is because the enemy prepared it. Anywhere
Yeah.
at different points, 3,000 ISIS fighters were defending that city. It took 100,000 soldiers, which is crazy, right? To think about.
100,000 soldiers to defeat 3,000.
Yes, in one city of
Wow.
a million, and they lost 10,000 soldiers to do it.
U.S. soldiers, 10,000
No,
U.S. soldiers.
10,000 Iraqi soldiers.
Oh, okay. I got you.
So
Wow.
we provided the air support for their operation,
I see. Hmm.
to basically liberate a city against a embedded defender who was willing to die in the city. We destroyed 80+% of Western Mosul. We flattened entire areas. We provided the air power, but they provided the ground forces, right? The blood, and they lost 10,000 soldiers to take a city back from just 3 to 5,000 ISIS fighters. This is what I was able to provide people.
Yeah.
But everybody started comparing Mosul to Gaza, like, but that's a city. That's one city of a million against
Yeah.
a geographic area that's relatively small. But there's 24 cities in Gaza. There's 10 cities of over 100,000. Like you can't compare one battle against a war with multiple
Yeah.
urban battles.
Yeah. 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 Gaza is definitely a different animal for sure.
Yeah,
And I learned that the hard way from being there last 20 years ago,
yeah,
when the IDF was actually able to subdue any of the attempted uprisings of these terrorist groups, like what you pointed out with ISIS. I mean, they essentially just took over and spread like wildfire, and it's because they have resources. So money, I imagine, is part of the reason why they took over. They were able to pay everybody what they wanted, bribe. they came with strength, right? With
Yeah,
financial strength of it. We'll pay this guy, we'll pay this guy. That guy will shut up, this guy will shut up, and before you know it, they're there, and they're your worst nightmare, and you didn't even realize it. And that's essentially, yeah. I mean, to me, that's what I've seen in Gaza since we left. Is that when there wasn't the deterrence of the IDF that was able to suppress any of those thugs, like you said, that they just won't, they'll plan, but if they don't have resources,
that's right.
etc., they can't do what they want to do. And then when we left that whole area empty and vacant for so many years, they have been cooking up a very nasty surprise for the IDF that we walked right into and had no clue off the bat. I mean, we had an idea,
Mhm.
but not the magnitude, and not the infrastructure in its full glory. And we're still discovering more of its of the Hamas infrastructure and ability that they have been building within an urban area.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
15 years of defensive planning, and
Yeah,
billions of dollars. Um, you're right. And this is the thing
yeah,
about people don't understand about power, right? So, like you said, even if it
yeah.
isn't a majority opinion, a very small group of people. I mean, why did 3,000 people have the ability to rule over a million in Mosul? Because
Hmm.
they use fear, terror, extreme force to rule. It's about
Hmm.
power. Even Saddam Hussein, who, if you've ever seen the video when he walks into basically the Iraqi Congress and just start calling out people's names and escort
Yeah,
them outside. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Even
yeah.
even a
The
totalitarian.
the dreaded
That's right.
him.
That's right. And they're all like, "I love
Yeah,
you."
yeah.
It's
He goes, sure, 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 and does like the dictator,
That's
right?
right, with a cigar. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, no, right. That's right. That's a great movie.
Yeah, like, yeah, 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 yeah. Just get, sure.
But
I know
even
you love me.
he shared power with his enemies in Iraq. He would pay off tribal leaders because there's no way he was going to even with brutal rule
Yeah.
oversee those. So he paid tribal leaders. He actually cut off irrigation, so he would use that power over outside
Mm,
of the capitals areas. He had the secret police, all this stuff. This is
yeah.
but also this is a very Western ideal. Like everybody has the common goals that we do, right? We all see through the same cultural human rights lens. And like when I
Yeah.
tell you, I went around and met a bunch of Tony Sopranos in Baghdad City, who I could tell like this is a really bad guy. Uh,
That's good.
and I would just
Yeah,
meet
yeah,
with him
yeah,
every day, going like, "Hey, everything's quiet." He's like, "Yep, we caught this guy, kind
yeah,
of, yeah, but everything's quiet." I'm like, all right,
yeah.
that's all I need.
That's a good point because I think people don't understand. I mean, it's like it's like you have to deal. This isn't the West.
Nope.
This isn't Western ideals. The people are discussing here. It's it's the one who carries the biggest stick, the one who has the biggest threat element, or element of they will destroy you. That's the one who's going to control the area, and essentially you have to pick of the worst, of the lesser of the worst evils, or whatever, however you say it, right? To be like, okay, this is going to be our guy, like you're saying, like a Tony Soprano,
Yep.
because it really is that crooked and that messed up, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is where
And
I believe strongly that
yeah,
again, even Israelis that I talk to who don't have an education in war don't
yeah,
understand what's going on in Gaza. Like, where's this going? Like, well, step
mm-hmm.
one is remove Hamas, and
All right,
step two is remove their actual military capability, which is a great source of power of their power. I know that's hard to put for you.
correct.
Um,
Yeah, exactly,
and
exactly.
then you have to find a new power. So that's the thing is you can't just leave. That's crazy. This is where people don't understand the U.S. military, even with all its Western moral, legitimacy on corruption, all these things. When
Yeah,
I would go talk to Tony Soprano, I was giving him power.
yeah,
Though Israel will have to back whatever comes after Hamas because it won't survive, whatever it is. I mean, this is like the ideals that, like, of course, Hamas pulls high in the West Bank or in Judea and Samaria, but the Palestinian Authority, we're going to make sure that that's not going to happen because they're the power. Israel will have
correct.
to back, not like physically, and sometimes for a while physically, but we'll have to back with its power, even with,
Yeah.
talking to that power in order for it to survive over this other brutal gangster other power, which is what we've seen. Like you saw, like I'm not an expert at this. When
Hmm.
Israel pulled out, Hamas seizes power from Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, and everybody's like, "Well, you got to let it happen." Like, well, you
Yeah.
didn't have to, but you did.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're dealing with the consequences today, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, this is because this is separate than my urban warfare, right? This is my strategy hat. Understanding that there was hope that even a power that isn't necessarily a good guy is still going to have the shared interest of rational people. Like, I want to pursue a policy that's going to improve the lives of the people who I am overseeing, my population, where Hamas is not a rational actor, and it actually, by deeds and words, has actually acted for over 15 years in the opposite of pursuit of improving the lives of the Palestinian people of Gaza. It has, the
Hmm.
billions of dollars it invested in this terror network. I mean, this is where I don't want to be heartless about it, but having traveled the world, the tunnel network that Hamas built could hold over 2.2 million people. Everybody could be in Hamas's tunnels, safeguarded from the war, but not one is allowed, which is an act of Hamas. Um,
Of the Gazan civilians
that,
you're talking about.
that's right.
Yeah.
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 Same thing with the water situation. Every bit. It's Hamas is the first combatant I've ever studied to include Iraq, but go back to the Nazis, to the Japanese. They're the first combatant in a war that I've ever seen deploy a human sacrifice strategy.
Hmm.
I used to use them as an example of human shield strategy, or lawfare, like using the hospitals, using the school. But Hamas is the first one I've ever seen who says and acts where they want as many of their population to die as possible to achieve their political goals, which is what war
Hmm.
is, right? War is a pursuit. You can talk about the tanks and the tunnels and all that stuff, but it's the pursuit of this political goal. Hamas's
Yeah.
political goal is the destruction of Israel. And it
Yeah.
says, and has acted since October 7th to try to get as many women, children, as killed as possible to achieve this political goal. That's evil. And
Yes,
I've never,
it is.
even the Japanese who were vicious in what they did. Even this is what when I had to actually got asked by the prime minister to talk about urban warfare. I gave him the example of the Battle of Manila, which I don't know if you've heard this. In 1945, after the U.S. military had been defeated in the Philippines, we returned. One of our first goals was the liberation of our prisoners of war and internees that we had left behind. So
Hmm.
there were over 3,000 in the city of Manila, right, the capital city of Manila. There were over 3,000 U.S. and British prisoners of war, but also men, women, and children, the internees, being held in the city of Manila. And MacArthur hits the beach and says, "Go to Manila and get our people." So we launch, which has a lot of similarities actually to one like Gaza City. We launched a division, basically 37,000 American forces against the defending Japanese, and the Japanese were defending it with about 17,000. Um, MacArthur didn't want the city destroyed. He loved the city of Manila. Not both for human. He didn't want to see the Philippine people suffer, but he also loved the city. He served there. His dad served there, so he restricted air power. Like the U.S. military had to attack Manila, a defense with no air power, and
Wow.
we did, and we successfully got our prisoners of war rapidly. With 37,000 troops to include some Philippine soldiers or troops. 100,000 civilians died in that battle.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
but so you think that number's high, which it is. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but one of the things
Yeah.
that you
For me, that's mission failure. I mean, for our standard. actually.
That's just
But
towards the now, right? But
wow.
you
Yeah.
know who?
Even in today, yeah.
So the whole thing with if you bomb less, there'll be less civilian destruction. Not true.
Yeah.
The whole because
True.
as a
True.
soldier, like if I don't have the capability to drop a bomb on the building that I know the enemy is in, and actually the Japanese had tunnels, they had a sewer system they were using, they had really strong buildings, strong points that the Americans had built in Manila. So like the Treasury
Yeah.
building, the university, like if I can't drop a bomb on it, then I have to close with and destroy, use screening and infantry tactics to it's a bloody, destructive. I'll use mortars, I'll use direct fire.
Yep.
So most of the
Yep.
city is destroyed, burned. But of those 100,000, again, this gets to you when you start hearing about Hamas providing numbers of civilian casualties. Nobody
Yeah.
even asked the questions of, well, you're inferring. Matter of fact, I've seen most of the world say that of the number that Hamas provides on civilian casualty, Israel caused all of them. Matter of fact, they say
Hmm.
Israel airstrikes caused a majority of them. Well, that's
Hmm.
like in Manila saying that the U.S. military caused 100,000 civilians to die, when actually the Japanese were slaughtering the civilians during the battle and stacking them in the basements of the houses 5 high.
Oh my.
They were
Oh
just
my.
because they didn't care. It wasn't their civilians.
Because they weren't
They
Japanese,
weren't Japanese. They were
so they
just
didn't care.
matter of fact,
Oh
the
man.
other thing which is really eerie about now is that one of the things that the Japanese did in Manila too was starve the population weeks before they knew the Americans was coming, because they knew that the Americans would have to deal with the humanitarian crisis. So they started burning.
That is
Yeah,
miserable.
isn't it insane?
Ah.
And lastly, so all 17, so the combatant to civilian ratio, right? So it's really
Yeah.
awful. So one,
Yeah.
the Japanese were killing you just tens of thousands of civilians. They killed themselves. So the 17,000
That's
defenders,
right. Yeah.
the numbers are all they all died.
Yeah.
Where I can tell you, and remember when I told you in the battle of the 2016-17 battle of
Yeah.
Mosul, the
Hmm.
fact that 10,000, I didn't tell you, but 10,000 civilians died and there was about 3,000 defending enemy. No,
Yeah.
there's no number of how many. So everybody wants to take the biggest number of the defenders and say that they all died, and there's no number. We don't know how many ISIS defenders died, but we have this guesstimate of 10,000 civilians died to take the city away from 3 to 5,000. So it's a really high number, but really in actuality, we don't know how many ISIS fighters died. So this is the whole thing about all the numbers equating to intention, equating to there's another way to do this.
Mm.
Of course, history shows you could do this in another way. No, actually, I'm the guy who's saying I can show you how it went a lot worse historically. All the
Hmm.
numbers show, and this is where people don't believe me when you probably haven't heard my headlines, but when I say um, stop trying to compare Gaza to anything because there's been nothing like it before in the history of war. A,
Correct.
a combatant of this size with that level of defensive preparation, 15 years, with hostages, with 400 miles of tunnels, with 15,000 rockets going over the heads of the soldiers aimed at the civilian areas. Nobody's faced that. And then the other word is no other military in the history of war has ever done more to prevent civilian casualties in a war. And that includes in these counterterrorism battles against insurgencies. ISIS was an insurgency, and we still didn't do all the things the IDF is doing to prevent the loss of life, of civilian loss of life, the collateral damage, as we say.
Yeah. So you're saying the IDF is going to a greater extent to prevent civilian casualties in Gaza than what U.S. military protocol would be.
Than any military in history.
Wow.
Think about
So
it. Like when we invaded Panama,
yeah,
Grenada, Afghanistan, Iraq, when we invaded to overthrow you know how much warning we gave civilians? Zero.
zero, zero. Yeah.
Because,
Why would you?
right,
Because it endangers your men.
there's this old dead Chinese general that never existed, Sun Tzu, who had 4 strategies. He did.
That's right.
There's no such thing as a guy, but he had four strategies to defeat your
Right.
enemy. One is to
Correct.
defeat your enemy's strategy, win without fighting. Two is
Right.
to defeat your enemy's allies, because we all know that your strength, which really gets to Israel. Israel's strength is very strong, but its strength is its allies. Number three is
Right.
defeat your enemy's military. So, which is what everybody reverts to. And lastly is to attack a besieged city. This
Hmm.
dude, this fictional guy 2,000 years ago foresaw what's happening today. The worst
Yeah.
strategy is to let your enemy know you're coming, let him prepare his urban area to defend it, and you attack a besieged city. That's
Yeah.
why the 2004 Battle of Fallujah is bigger than any battle of the entire Iraq War. That's why the Battle of Mosul is the biggest battle since World War II, because it's the
Yeah.
worst thing you could do is to give the enemy all the warning, all the notice, and all the time to prepare for defense so he can turn every city block into a destructive battle.
Yeah. Agreed with you 100%. I mean, for me, the biggest frustration is being one of the war fighters that has to step into that, hell zone, um, is knowing that and being frustrated with our command, and being the little cog in the wheel going, what the flip are we doing here? I mean, 1 week goes by, 2 weeks go by. We're like, besides clearing houses within Israel territory and searching for terrorists that were hiding out or whatever, we haven't done nothing, you know? And it like really pissed off a lot of my guys. It's like, our hostages are held captive. They're releasing footage of the hostages, horrible footage. And we're like, what are we doing? You know? And all of us were griping about it. And then finally, when given the green light, it's like, oh, well, that's convenient, so now they know we're coming. Wonderful. You know, like, what I'm saying? As a soldier on the ground, and people can be, you know, like when you watch people watch soccer or football, like American football, right? Here it's, soccer, right? The European thing. Everybody's a armchair, hey, that was horrible, and I'm just like, yeah, he's just top world athlete, right? He's total idiot. You could do better, with your beer in your
That's
hand.
right.
And that's how I feel is people are critiquing me with their beer in their hand,
Yep.
and they think they're so smart, they think they're so clever. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't you step in my shoes and do this better than me? I'd love to see you try.
Well, this
You
is
wouldn't you wouldn't last a second, you
so
know?
there's two parts to what you're talking. One, the easy
you
part is
know?
the Armed Corps general. Even like we sent advisors
Yeah.
to Israel. We know so much more about this problem set. Um, it's like
Right.
you'll find this is the only gift I've been given is the time to know every play that's been called, like to use the sports analogy, in this situation.
Yeah.
Like the pattern
Right.
recognition of what's the realm of possible here. Because all these criticizers, there's two parts to your question. The criticizers who think there's another way, they don't know what the other way is, or the other
Right.
other way is like we have these what we call in the military courses of action. You always have three, right? The
Yep.
the one you
Yep.
want, and then the two throwaways. Like they're unrealistic. So like the
Right.
number one recommendation to Israel was don't invade Gaza. Just leave your hostages in captivity. Either negotiate or some magic special force that's never existed in life who can penetrate enemy territory when they know you're
Yeah.
coming and find all the hostages that way over the
Right.
legitimately, and they'll say, it'll take you a couple of years. Like, well, that's an unrealistic. The other one, though, what you talked about was because I've been there,
Yeah.
is at the when you don't understand. We have this problem even within militaries to not understand what strategy is, right? Don't understand from the political goal down to the translation to the actual what you're doing on the ground. I faced that
Yeah.
as a soldier. I faced it even translating to my men, and I think I did a bad job, especially in 2008. Like, what are we doing here? Like, we're handing out soccer balls, and we're doing, you're giving out money straight out. I would just
Yeah.
give out money to infuse in the economy. Like, how's this?
Yeah.
It's not what I signed up to do in the military, but not
Right.
understanding the chosen strategy to achieve whatever the goal is, which
Yeah.
changed. I think there's
Yeah.
a real gap in militaries. This gets to like a professional force, even within the U.S. military. The people who actually understand. We call it the strategy bridge, right? From the tactics to the strategy. There's this bridge that all these theorists talk about. We don't teach even soldiers that what that bridge is, because sometimes it's like, okay, you need to know how to close with and destroy the enemy. You don't need to know what the strategic plan is here. But in some ways, having leaders who can translate that to understand what the actual goal is and what the chosen path has been, whether you agree with it or not, to get to it.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
And then the soldier can at least have I know the what I'm doing here,
The why,
right?
right? Yeah.
It, the why,
Yes.
the why. So besides yourself, I also and I've mentioned this on the podcast as well, but Lord Andrew Roberts, who you know the name, right?
I met him in
Uh,
London a couple weeks ago.
cool. So would you say he's an authority on war?
Absolutely.
Does he understand what he's talking about?
He's a military
So
historian. Again, you like
yeah, please explain this to us
yeah.
because I use this guy as a legit look. This guy is actually saying that, in contrary to what you're saying, the armchair people, that I'm committing a genocide.
Yeah.
And how do you sleep at night?
Yeah.
I go, really? Well, here's a guy who doesn't owe me jack, and here's what he has to say. And this guy is an expert. I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
I'm an expert in what I do, but it's not, I'm not some, I don't have any titles behind me.
Yeah. So I think the worst, because I can, as a fellow soldier, I can tell you this. I think the worst of these different groups who know better is the guy
Yeah.
who says, that's not what we did. Like, well, that has nothing to do with this. Or I have
Yeah.
40 years of military experience and that's not what we did. Like, it has nothing to do with it.
Hmm.
Where you have, either within the military or outside the military, within the military, we call them warrior scholars, right? People who are actually students of the profession, but also practitioners. So then you put in that category a General McMaster, a General Petraeus. They literally have PhD in war studies who have studied
Yeah.
everybody's wars, not just our
Hmm.
own experiences. Lord Andrew Roberts, a military historian, same thing. He studied everybody's wars, to include the British wars, to include the American wars. I highly recommend, if you haven't read it, his book with General Petraeus, which they're going to update actually with a Ukraine and Gaza chapter called Conflicts,
Good.
where they run from literally from Israel's war of independence up to Ukraine. Highly recommend it. But yes, if he says that Israel is like I do, and I can give you the short list of
Yeah.
actual students of war who, with fact-based, evidence-based history, say that what
Yeah.
Israel is facing, nobody's faced. What Israel is doing is very discriminate, not how we would do it. So that's the other thing. Like, listen to General Mark Milley, if you haven't heard his statement, who was the chairman of Joint Chief of Staff of the U.S. military for 2 presidents. It's amazing. And he was asked, like, what do you think the American military would have done? And he was the guy who would have recommended to our president what to do about an October 7th attack on the U.S. homeland. We would have launched immediate, overwhelming force onto the enemy, making sure that not one rocket emanated out of enemy territory, making sure that multiple divisions launched towards our hostages. But we're also a superpower who can sometimes go it alone. Uh,
Right. Right.
but he said we would have, a guy with literally like held the job. Like, of course, we would have done this totally different. We would have used overwhelming force and
Right.
not taken our foot off the enemy's neck
Yeah.
for the entire operation. So yes, definitely listen to Andrew Roberts, but there's a short list of others that are actually informed opinions. The only other camp, honestly, on Gaza is this counter-terror, counterinsurgency expert class of academia who says, you're creating more terrorists than you're taking off the battlefield. You're not
Uh-huh.
winning the hearts and minds. You're not
All right.
giving the population a path towards another place. Like, what are you talking about? This is phase 1 of the war. You have to remove the evil power first, then go through post-conflict re-education. I mean, Eisenhower in 1945, in October 1945, said it would take 50 years to re-educate the Nazis. And if you ever think I'm going to give Germany the power to wage war, you're crazy. Those are literal quotes of his in newspapers. Those are more appropriate frameworks to think about Gaza than in a counterinsurgency battle that went on for 20 years, 10 years, Vietnam, you name it. Like, those are the wrong constructs to use in the first phase of the IDF's accomplishing a crazy task to fight in this environment which has been prepared for war for 15 years.
Yeah. I think a good thing for people to understand too is the ideology that we're up against.
Yes.
Um, you know, here's first I'll give you my experience, what I've seen on the ground, and then you can feedback and tell me, explain how this makes your job much harder, I guess. So when we were in Gaza back in 2003 is when I first got introduced to the Gaza Strip and the whole, bad guys there, whatever. And then we pulled out in 2005. So in that period of my experience there, the Gazans were normal Arabs. You had good guys, you had bad guys, and it's usually by tribe. And we knew which tribe were the good guys that just wanted to go to work, that just wanted to live a normal life. They were not interested in terrorism. They were just interested in putting food on their table, a roof over their head, normal people. Today, when I step into Gaza years afterwards, after Hamas has permeated the whole of the strip with propaganda, it is shocking because every home I've entered, literally every home that I've entered, had Hamas propaganda, flags, report cards of kids with terrorist imagery and propaganda, game boards, like like when you guys play Monopoly. Their Monopoly is how do we take over? How do we take over Israel? How do we slaughter every Jew? Mathematics, right? You know, 10 soldiers, go to base. You kill 8. What are you left with, right? Inshallah, etc. So this is the kind of stuff I ran into. Is that literally and what it feels like as a soldier, it feels very overwhelming and like, what am I accomplishing here, right? It's like I'm going after the bad guys who are armed, but everybody here seems to be a bad guy, so to speak, at least ideologically speaking. Just to be clear for the audience, ideologically everybody here are supporting these guys. And then the other thing is that I didn't run into any uniformed terrorists, right? I mean, I've seen hundreds of terrorists, but not one of them in uniform. So, can you explain that to people, like that you're basically facing an ideology that's like you talked about the Nazis, right? As far as ideology and driven, and how do you defeat that? You know?
Yeah. Which is get go again and go back to all these experts.
Yeah,
One of their pressing things, um, to include General Petraeus, who was the mastermind of a strategy which got to a certain level of good enough for us to get out of of Iraq and the counterinsurgency. The question is, how do you defeat an ideology? One is to, I agree with you. There is a world of difference to even these other campaigns where the insurgency, the radicalized, is a small fraction of the population. And that's why you
yeah,
have to use a population centric strategy where you live amongst the people. So they'll give you intelligence about the bad guys, which are whether they're family members or foreign fighters. They'll tell you about them and you could pursue this counterinsurgency perspective. But when you're talking about a radicalized population, how do you defeat an ideology? Goes back to like, okay, your framework is wrong. This isn't a fraction of the society, and you just need to sway the majority towards a better path. You have the de-radicalization strategies are also a very common understanding that is more applicable to a post-German population, a post-Japanese population. But step one, before you could even attempt de-radicalization process, which is generational, right? You have to change the textbooks in the
yeah,
schools. You have to change the education program. You have to change the how do you actually earn money. The pay for slave problem, in the Palestinian Authority is a real big problem to keeping people radicalized. If that's a path towards a better life for my family, I just get martyr myself. And you, there are plenty of ways to defeat an ideology, but it will never work if you don't take the power of the source of the power of the radicalized system at the moment. So this is
hmm
there is a way to do it as you're fighting, right? This is that clear hold and then build. And that applies both tactically, like a city block. You clear the enemy, you hold it, and you don't let him back in. Which is really, people don't understand. Even in the city of Fallujah, right, which is a
Hmm.
micro scale of Gaza, but we went in first, got defeated by information warfare, and then we let the city to itself for like 6 months. And so I thought we just can contain the problem. It turned into like an enemy sanctuary. We emptied the city of 90+% of the population. But what escapes people is that we didn't let anybody back into the city unless they went through a checkpoint to ensure that we weeded out that fundamental power that was keeping the criminal elements there. Where you're right, what I've heard is that Hamas is the tribe. So
Yeah.
you still got to remove that power and then place a new power before you can even attempt de-radicalization and reconciliation. This is where my soldiers struggled even in Iraq. Like from 2003 to when I went back in 2008, a lot of people did really bad things because they were picking a side. They were putting
Mhm.
IEDs on the streets. They were attacking Americans and the new Iraqi security forces. Well, in order to move to a point of stability, you had to reconcile with many of those people who had made bad decisions. That's common too, right? Like the post Japanese
Yeah.
system, there's de radicalization strategies, reconciliation, all these are all known, but none of it would ever work if the main source of controlling the society is left there and given the ability, the freedom to rise again, because that gets to the will. Like the reason that the IDF keep facing Hamas forces and having to go back into areas is because Hamas as a organization thinks they can win. They still have the will to fight. So they're still,
Right.
even underground, both literally and figuratively, trying
Yeah.
to control power. And of course the population is still scared of that power that ruled them. So you have to put a new power and then begin de-radicalization. There is a way to defeat an ideology, but that's not what you, in this phase, your top priority, because the strategies for defeating an ideology can't work if there's not, you know, the old power is not gone and you don't achieve a certain level of security for something new to grow.
So basically, Israel should not negotiate with Hamas. And if anything, if I'm understanding correctly, what, if anything, what Israel should do is we should keep with the hardline military pressure that is basically causing them to make mistakes, causing them to fail, causing them to break down and to lose. Which I know that in the very beginning of the war, up until about December, we did just that. And then all of a sudden, it's like we pulled the foot off the brakes, and all my guys were like, "What the flip are we doing? This is stupid,
Right.
right?" And so that's my mindset. And correct me if I'm wrong. That you have to give a deafening, or how's the word, uh, um, a defeat, like
Yes.
like a very strong defeat
Yep.
to your
Yep.
enemy, so that all of their constituents that have thought that these guys are the Messiah
Yep.
can recognize, A, they're not, and B, we're the ones that carry the big stick in the neighborhood, and this is the Middle East, and you have to show that strength. And then in that vein, you can bring in ideas and suggestions. But it seems like everyone else in the world seems that they have it better figured out, that Israel needs to negotiate, and that there's just too many civilians dying in Gaza, and it's because of the IDF, right? Hamas is, they're totally okay with, they've been doing fine, they're just defending their citizens, and
So
I'm the bad guy.
yeah, no, there's a lot there. And
You know what I mean?
yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you. There's the ideals, like if John Spencer was in charge of anything, the ideals of what would
Yeah.
achieve the goals the quickest way. Of course, would have been use overwhelming force. Don't let the foot off the enemy's neck, making sure he knows he's defeated. Um, achieving the goal quickly, getting the hostages home, so that's not used as psychological warfare. But war is a contest of will. So in December, when the strategy of Hamas is to convince the world that something wrong was happening in this war was working. So Israel's strength is its allies. Hezbollah's attacking. This is where I can
Hmm.
say, if I
Yeah.
was speaking to an IDF formation, like I understand if I'm the guy on the ground, I would want to achieve this goal quickly, even for which we did. We didn't want to see Iraqi civilians harmed, or we wanted to improve their lives, all this stuff.
Right.
But war is fought within this greater context. So I understood. I didn't disagree, and that's why I was writing furiously that you were believing the casualty number. You were believing the numbers about
Yeah.
more destructive than what war? What war is more destructive than? Or you were believing that the IDF was being I would hate to be on the ground as an IDF soldier, and if I had awareness of the lies that were being told, and this is why I went there 3 times. Like I couldn't just sit back here in my comfy room judging
Yeah.
what I saw on TVs because that's not really an understanding of what the IDF is doing. Uh,
Yeah.
but this is where I've been surprised that the IDF has accomplished what they have. I agree with you. The world has, this is where I've said too, the world owns much of the destruction and suffering in Gaza. If there is,
Yeah.
because the world said, look, IDF, you are fighting a war very discriminately against an enemy, a brutal enemy, using human sacrifice, human shields. You got to find a different way to do it, though. You can't, one, you can't use as many forces, you can't use as many munitions, aerial munitions, and you have to bring the civilian casualty below what? Matter of fact, the world started saying zero. You need to have zero civilian casualties in your operations in Gaza. Like, well, that means you want me to.
Because that's exactly what you would do,
That's
right?
right, which is not right. There's no history saying that's what you would do, but you, because it's
Yeah.
Israel,
Right.
because
Why do you think there's such a double standard?
it's not a double standard, brother. What I've told people is that it would be a double standard if there was a standard. Like it's the, the Israel, the
Yeah.
standard in which the world and even my government has tried to hold Israel to is a standard that's never existed. I know where it
Hmm.
comes from. Like they don't use 2,000-pound bombs, don't use evacuate the cities, all this stuff. Like these are standards that have never been used in a war, like in an invasion to remove a power and destroy its military. It's a
Yeah.
combination of standards that have been used over the last 30 years and put together in an ideal of a way a war is fought that is unrealistic. So it's a double standard
Yeah.
because it's Israel, right? Yeah, of course it's a double standard. Israel has never been able to win a war. It's been able to defend itself to a point, and then the world tells it to stop. Like that's history.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
because of social media,
Yeah.
Hamas was able to use what I call, again, if you're a student of war, you've seen this coming. In the Vietnam War, it's called the Cronkite effect.
Thank you.
In the
I use that example, by the way.
oh, great! It's an amazing
Yes.
example where with the Tet. I actually had somebody tell me the other day that the Tet offensive was a victory for us. Like, what are you talking about? The Tet offensive was a strategic defeat because Cronkite was on the ground and came back and told so we lost the will to fight. We call it the
Yeah.
Cronkite effect we call it the CNN effect. Basically that CNN could
Mhm.
be on the ground showing the world what's happening, and those were trusted voices. Then I call it the Fallujah effect because what happens in the first battle of Fallujah is that 4 Americans burned, dismembered, hung from bridges. The American president says, "Go get those responsible." Sounds a lot like Gaza. And we launched 2 battalions into the city of Fallujah. And Al Jazeera is at the main hospital, airing photos of wounded children and coming up with fake numbers of civilian casualties. And the U.S.
Yeah.
military is defeated, brother.
Yeah.
We're 6 days into it. The American forces are told to stop because the Iraqi
Yeah.
government's going to disband. The UK is going to walk away from the coalition. So we went back 6 months later, but it's called the Fallujah effect. Um,
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
Hamas has put that on steroids thanks to social media, algorithm driven, to where you have literally world leaders parroting a number that is false, like a number
Yeah.
that's not true, or parroting things like Gaza's the densest place on earth, or this is the most destructive wars since Dresden.
And you've been to Gaza, and that's not at all true.
No, it's not.
There's plenty of open spaces, right?
I'm a student of urban warfare. I've been to Mumbai, India. Like, how about somebody
Thank you.
do some
Thank you.
traveling? It's
Exactly.
not even in its top 100. But
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is the world
But
wars.
these are things that
Yep.
get spun. Exactly.
And to
Exactly.
where it's influencing policy, right? Because some aspect of
Hmm.
me, not that I agree with Israel's approach to combating information warfare. I think there's lots of room for improvement. But this is,
We suck at it.
yeah,
I'll just say
yeah.
it.
There
We
you go.
suck at
There
it.
you go. I want,
Yeah. That's why I have this podcast.
yeah,
It's because we suck at the information war. We suck at being able to present our side
yes,
in a way that people can understand, that they can relate to.
yep.
And so yeah,
Yeah, why
I'll say
here's the
it.
example on that one. Why is John Spencer going to Con Eunice, learning about the use of facial recognition, the use of a civilian harm mitigation strategy where you can track the population in a certain neighborhood and you can't go into that area? Like, I'm coming back and explaining that to the world. Like, that's a gap in information sharing with, which is a problem. But I do believe
Yeah,
that wars, as we've seen in Ukraine, this
yeah,
is the status that wars will be fought in, where,
yeah,
we taught in military colleges, right? I didn't know this as a private or as a sergeant or whatever, that there are really good frameworks in military theory that help people understand war. War is, a contest of will, of course, but it's between the militaries. Everybody always, and even I did as a soldier, like, our job is to destroy the other military. Bam, that's it. Like, okay, look,
right.
war is a con.
Bottom line.
That's right. Bottom line, that's what your military's there for, right? Close with to destroy the
Right.
enemy, take
Yeah.
take what he values, etc. But it's actually a contest of wills between the two militaries. Like, so if you can crush the other military and degrade it to where all its soldiers just walk away, that's beating their will to fight. But it's actually a
Hmm.
contest of wills between their governments and their population, right? This is what happened in
Yeah.
Vietnam. We didn't lose on any battlefield. We didn't lose a single battle. We lost the will of our population to continue the pursuit of the political goals that our government had set for us, which was really to back an illegitimate government who is corrupt. Uh,
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
understand that as a young soldier. So, but this is the Hamas understood that better than most people, that they are not, although they're trying to kill a lot of IDF, they're not trying to defeat the IDF. All they have to do is win in the homes of Israel's allies populations,
Yeah.
and which is what they have
Yeah.
done, right? They have convinced massive idiots. The
Yeah.
Russians call them useful idiots, that Israel
Yeah.
is bad in Gaza. Israel is doing bad things. That's the Hamas
Yeah.
strategy working.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And, like one of the things that I've noticed too that's different in this war that we're fighting is talking about Russia and Ukraine a little bit, that I know my unit studied, and we actually practiced this. I think, I don't remember, I didn't see anybody talking about it or practicing it, but because we studied the Ukraine Russia war,
Mhm.
we learned of the drone warfare.
Yeah.
And so literally just months before the war broke out, I was the one that was actually helping uh, train the young guys that we were building the unit for in the paratrooper battalion that we were detached to, or attached to. I mean, that I was showing them, here's what it's like. Here's how you're not going to be able to identify this threat until it's kind of too late because of just all the battlefield noises, tanks, Humvees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember just trying to get them to understand, like you need to realize this is bad news. It's not, you know, and literally within, like I said, when we finally changed gears and like, okay, we're going in. I was there on the staging area where we saw the soldiers taken out from that first drone strike that killed one of the soldiers, and got to see that body being, taken away, and processed. And you're just like, wow, holy crap, you know.
So
And that was like wake up to reality. And I was like, hey, well, that training was for a reason. And then very quickly right after that, all the tanks and everything, like, and you probably saw that, uh, defended themselves by building these cages and
cope
stuff
cages.
around
Yeah.
themselves.
Yep. We
Yeah.
call them cope cages,
Yeah.
which is interesting
Yeah.
as a researcher of war, right? So I have a dream job.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
civilians
Yeah. You do.
civilians would say, like, "What are you talking about? It's crazy. You have a dream job." But I get to go into war zones and, from
Yeah.
my own lens, So I went to a place called Nagorno-Karabakh in 2021 because in 2020 there was a war fought there. And really interesting, the circle of war really is that the Azerbaijanis, backed by superior military technologies, dominated the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenian-backed forces. Some of that through Israeli drones, right? Harap drones and TB2 Bayraktars, but it was basically everybody was saying it's this new drone warfare that is the future because the war happened in 2020. I was on the ground in 2021. I didn't agree, although I understood that this was a new evolution in air power and democratization of the threat. And you have to look up. Of course, the war ended over a city battle, so that's why I was there. But then I was traveling inside Ukraine and seeing how they were using the drones, and it comes back full circle to where Israel, this dream job that I have to go into combat, to be a combat observer, and to see the evolutions of these, we call them characters of warfare.
Hmm.
As a soldier, you understand most civilians don't. Like the character of warfare is always changing, right? The technologies and the tactics,
Yep.
the nature of warfare, the human aspect, this that is political, like none of that will remain the same. But the character, so the drone warfare character, as I went to Ukraine, over that, I was there within 2 weeks of the Russians leaving Kiev, and then I went back multiple times, and you see this explosion of drones. But everybody thought the Gaza war would be this explosion of drone warfare,
Correct.
but
Correct.
if you're not a combat observer or even a student of war, you don't know that the reason that drone explosions happening in Ukraine is because neither side has air supremacy. And what does the IDF have over Gaza is air supremacy. So I was
Correct.
surprised as well at everybody thought the drone thing would be one of the defining characteristics of that battle when it's not. Although, as you recognize, all enemies of greater power. Like I had this thing that I say all warfare is asymmetric. Like there is no symmetric warfare. Like I don't know what that is, but all warfare is
Yeah.
asymmetric, where the enemy, of course, is going to use anything it can that's being
Yeah.
developed. Matter of fact, the drone warfare actually starts, brother, in the Battle of Mosul.
Really.
Yes, ISIS was fielding commercial or civilian off the shelf hobby drones, both for aerial and for attack. In that is the first time American forces had to look up since the Korean War. But
Wow.
the
Wow.
ISIS innovation teams were fielding that in war. So that's like really where it started. And then you have the high military grade drones down to, oh wait a minute,
Right.
you can get a DJI off Amazon and have immense capabilities on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And I think the IDF were unprepared for that. Even like where I met with like the 55th Brigade during the Battle of Khan Yunis, who started the war with 0 tactical unit level drones, and before they leave, they have 250. They're not
Right.
they're not entering a space without a drone going in there first, right? Uh,
Yep. Yep.
it's crazy as the guy who has a dream job to see this evolution, institutional learning, in necessity is the mother of all innovations. And,
Yeah.
and why again the exchange of Israel has learned so much in the last 9 months that is going to change the character of warfare for the future, and save lives. And I strongly believe that.
I agree with you. So yeah, I mean, yeah, the whole drone thing to me is one of those failed opportunities. And I remember years ago telling my in another battalion I was in, I said, "Hey, why don't you know I have a drone, I can use it, bring it, just get me permissions, whatever, because this is a huge resource." And I just got frowned at and like and it's like until it like reaches up and like you're right. It was only during this round of conflict that we had that finally it became a thing, and the IDF realized, because we had it. I mean, we had it, but it usually was special units and whatever, and very small quantities. But like you said, like you observed, all of a sudden is like, okay, we need to get battalions with them. We need these, we need everybody have these capabilities. And so
So,
it's just funny to see how finally like it catches on. But you know, you're frustrated when you're the guy that can't make any decisions, but you're like seeing this tool and like, why the heck are we not using this? I'm trying to understand. You
so
know,
this is why the advantage. So one is the myth that the U.S. military has the best of everything.
right? Exactly.
That's a myth.
All my soldiers say that all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, they have better gun. I go, actually, I know a lot of American soldiers, and the answer is no. If you're in a in a special forces unit or tier
That's right.
one, yeah, but
This is where
under
the
that,
advantage I got, again, dream career as well. The advantage I
yeah,
got to work at the Pentagon, to understand the corporate side of military, to include procurement. Um,
hmm
I had, as a company infantry company commander in the battle, in Baghdad, in the battle of Sadr City, I had zero tact. I had this stupid Raven that we still have in our inventory, but having been in the Pentagon, understanding the procurement system is that the IDF at this moment, have better access to tactical drones than the US military, who have this little thing that flies for 8 minutes, or this big thing that doesn't fly in urban areas. And you'll have
right,
the Ranger Regiment and all these, they'll have the most applicable things, and they have a vehicle in which they can purchase it. But as a writ large, the US military buys, it has these cultural ideals. It has visions of the future. Has procurement processes. It, it's pretty crazy, especially in urban combat, right? So why
yeah,
the D7 or the D9, right?
yeah,
The
yeah,
the panda bear, the huggy bear. Um, that is proven urban warfare life saving tools. Um,
100%.
from
Yeah,
2002 on. And most people don't
that's right.
know that when the US military faced its greatest urban challenge in the Battle of Fallujah, guess what was brought in from Israel? A D9 bulldozer. Uh, we don't have D9 bulldozers because we don't envision ourselves fighting a protracted, contested, dense urban battle. Israel
hmm
knew it was going to where it has never enough, has many of them in each brigade. And there's, they said there's 18 per brigade. I know that's not true, but supposed to have 18 per brigade. The U.S.
right.
military, if we fought, we would do it differently, because one, we wouldn't have the same tools as well. We'd have, different tools. But Israel
hmm
is, that's why I kept going back to study, is you think the U.S. military has the best tools. You don't understand how the U.S. military is designed.
Right.
That fact that it's an expeditionary force, right? So everything has to be lighter. Like, why is the Merkava heavier, the bulldozer heavier? Like, well, you guys don't have to fly it halfway around the world. Uh,
Exactly.
there's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
weapons, everything. You think we have the best, when I understand how militaries are designed, actually force design. They're designed against specific scenarios. Unfortunately for the IDF has vastly different scenarios that they have to prepare for. Gaza is vastly different than the Golan Heights, or so that complicates fielding and military with capabilities. But your
hmm
ability, which is again the lessons learned of every war Israel has fought, is it has something in its DNA. Uh, and I'm not Israeli, I'm not Jewish, but history shows that um, the the IDF will find a way, and innovate both technologies and tactics at a speed in which other militaries haven't shown in war.
hmm
Really, I mean, if you think about, like, how did they do
Yeah.
that? Whether it's the War of Independence, 6 Day War, Yom Kippur War, under great suffering, but they still find a way, both in tactics and technology, to do the unthinkables, that have, even
hmm
the active protection systems. Like, again, these are things, you got the cope cages from Ukraine, who got them from the coming out of the Nagorno-Karabakh war. Russia entered Ukraine with cope cages that it thought would help against javelins, because it had watched the drone war that happened in Nagorno-Karabakh. So, as us military analysts, like, why is Russia putting cages on top of their tanks? And they literally thought it would stop a top-down attack,
Yeah.
but it was. it does stop some level of hobby drones. It doesn't stop a
Yeah.
top tank, anti-tank guided munition. So it was pretty
Right.
comical. But you see how people learn from this character of warfare or don't.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's a dream job.
That's a really good point. Um, well, brother, I think I've gotten you here for long enough.
Yeah,
I don't want to. We could go on forever on this, I'm sure.
yeah.
I'm a bit of a student of warfare and history, and you know, I really appreciate just all of the insights that you brought into this. And I'm going to make sure to put in the link here to the interview that you had with Jordan Peterson, where you went into different aspects that we didn't cover here. I purposely didn't want to just re-ask the same questions because I wanted people to just get a little bit more broader context here. But really, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you bringing some really good information and some book references that I've written down as well that I'm definitely going to delve into. Is there anything that I'm missing that you'd like to finish with
Nope. I
or add to?
nope. I appreciate it, and I think people are scared of what they don't understand. So you're basically a warrior in that fight to helping people understand. Um, because this has been the problem is that people don't understand what they're even seeing in front of their face. But you have the worst case where they think they know, even though they don't. Or those
Yeah,
that actually want to learn, and you're a warrior in that fight to help people understand. I appreciate.
that's exactly it. And so I'll make sure to put all your social tags here, your website that has lots of good information. And again, brother, I really appreciate your time. This has been great, and may you have a good continued of your week. But for you, it's your weekend.
It is, yes.
But for us, it's the beginning of our
But
week.
I'm
So
working on my weekends, so what does that say about me?
I know, I know. So really appreciate it,
All right.
brother. This is awesome.
Thanks, brother. Talk to you later.
All right, shalom.